Kartik, Chris and I are here for BeyondThe90.net. We have a special treat for you today, for you listeners and subscribers to Beyond the 90, which is Billy Corben, the famous Billy Corben, joining me on this podcast. We're also going to simulcast this with the Florida History Podcast and the Florida Squeeze, which are obviously more history and political and government relations entities, government relations covering entities, because Billy Corben is here to talk about the scam, taxpayer scam around the stadium deals in both Miami and Fort Lauderdale for Major League Soccer, as well as a topic of particular concern to me, as I think all our readers and listeners know, which is the public funding of World Cup 2026, right? And how it's a ripoff for taxpayers. This entire enterprise, we're talking about a small slice of the United States here in Miami-Dade and Broward counties in southern Florida, but I think this could apply to almost every host city in the United States, right? Could apply to everything. So those of you who know Billy Corben through his documentary filmmaking or through the Dan LeBetard Show, Because Miami, all the different things he's involved in, you should enjoy this. Those of you who don't know him, stay tuned, because I think you're going to understand and appreciate his perspectives and learn a lot while you listen to this. So here's the interview. Really excited to have Billy Corben, the one and only Billy Corben, with us, documentary filmmaker, Because Miami, the greatest spokesperson for the 305, and really the most visible person, along with Grant Stern and a couple others, holding people accountable in Miami-Dade County. So, Billy, thank you for joining us, and let's just jump right into it. Ever since Mayor Manny Diaz and the Miami Commission turned the Orange Bowl, which would be there would be people lying on the pavement to stop the bulldozers from plowing down a ground like that in Boston, in Chicago, in England, where we cover soccer, where we cover English football. But in Miami, nothing. It was just accepted, and that sort of began your advocacy on these sorts of issues.
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I mean, in Miami, we have a transient population and a lack of institutional memory. And as profoundly meaningful as the Orange Bowl was to so many people in this community, our industry here is development, is construction, is tourism, is real estate. That is ultimately our hustle. And whenever you're trying to figure out what's going on, you're like, I know this is a scheme or a scam. It's always a real estate hustle, or at least you have to default to that in order to perhaps understand and read between the lines and what's going on in a particular situation. And why are we giving this away? Or why is this sweetheart deal? Or why this corporate welfare? It's almost always a real estate hustle. And that's what, it was with the Orange Bowl too. But I think we have to, pardon me. I think we have to realize that, like death and taxes, sports welfare is kind of an inevitability. It's just one of the few things in life that you can guarantee. And the Orange Bowl was, to be fair, a kind of dated facility. It was a shithole, but it was our shithole. And it was, and it's right in the middle of Little Havana. It's one of the few venues we have like that. That's not an isolated stadium that feels like it's surrounded by concrete and parking lots. It was right there. It still is the Marlins Park to an extent, bordered by just homes and a community. And so it was, what's the best, I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of illustrate it for people who are not necessarily Miamians. I mean, you compared it to other cities that have a richer history and greater sports culture where people are invested in the teams and things like that. But truth be told, we just don't have that kind of culture down here in Miami. We had fair weather in Miami, and so we're allowed to have fair weather fans, in my opinion. And if you're not winning, nobody's interested in your product. That includes political parties too. If you're an irrelevant brand, people don't want to be associated with losers and with losing teams or losing brands. And that's kind of what happened here with the Dolphins in a way, with the Hurricanes for a while, certainly with the Marlins. But we did go ahead and managed to outdo all of the other sports welfare deals in the country for the worst sports welfare deal in history by knocking down the Orange Bowl and building that Marlins Park boondoggle, which is a remarkable achievement. You really have to hand it to them. And I think the biggest play there is the what I call the intangibles of sports, which is that when you say I'm a fan, that's short for fanatic. That means that there is no rationale or reason or logic involved. You are fanatical. You are a fan. And so that's what happens. They really kind of pull at your heartstrings in order to get these shitty things passed. And that's what they did with the Orange Bowl. They said, we can do something better. I mean, listen, our so-called leaders have warped values and perverse incentives, and they measure the definition of progress by the number of construction cranes that they can count on the horizon, or the amount of our public money that they could give away to millionaire and billionaire developers and sports team owners. And that's what makes the world go round down here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, unfortunately, when it comes down to it, this is a place that has never diversified its economy properly beyond development. So, my personal experience, Billy, is there. I grew up in Broward County. There are two places I grew up in: the Orange Bowl for games, and Lockhart Stadium for soccer games. And we're going to get to Lockhart in a minute because that's part of this story with Jorge Mas. But then let's start with Moss and Beckham with Melreese and what happened with the city of Miami there, and with Mayor Suarez and Commissioner Carollo, former mayor, and DLP, and all of the characters that have made Miami the cesspool of the Western Hemisphere in terms of, or at least of the North America in terms of, I mean, when we talk about places like Brazil and Argentina, maybe we can't compete. But in terms of North America,
I think we can compete.
Okay. Yeah. So that's something to be proud of in the 305. We can't compete with corruption in Brazil.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but those guys have made this the cesspool of North America. And this deal for Melreese, despite all of the clear indications about how it would affect that area of Miami, affect traffic, affect the neighborhood, affect the First Tee program, and the commissioner who represented that district in, as we talked about before we got on air, he wasn't always the best, but this was a shining moment for him. Absolutely. Really being adamant about it, they rammed it through.
Absolutely. They we try to tell them, don't bend over for Beckham. And that's exactly what they did. In Miami, we don't recycle our trash. We re-elect it. And so we are plagued in this community by a handful of multi-generational, corrupt political dynasties. And we have the same last names over and over and over again. Sometimes the same people. Sometimes it's their siblings. Sometimes it's their spouses. Sometimes it's their offspring. But we are just plagued by this corrupt, rotten political class down here that is very third world, I would say. I always say Miami has third world government and fourth world infrastructure. And part of the reason why we can't have nice things is that we divert the substantial budgets of our communities into boondoggles and sports welfare deals for billionaires like this Melreese hustle, which was nothing more. Again, the stadium was a shiny object. It was the prestidigitation. It was the distraction for the people. It's what softened the hearts and minds of soccer fans to say, this is what we need to do, and this is what this is, and this is what we need, and this is... But it was all a real estate hustle. It was a straight up land grab of the city's largest contiguous piece of property and largest green space in all of Miami, and turned into its biggest real estate hustle, of course, which is not a stadium, just a soccer stadium, but a $1 billion development to pave Paradise and put up a parking lot, a hotel, a so-called tech hub, a shopping mall, some park space as well for the public, but mostly all this other retail shit and restaurants that is going to benefit who? Just the people who now have a 99-year no-bid under market value lease on this gigantic piece of property right next to Miami International Airport. We can get into the logistic complications of that, but this was a bought and paid for scheme by an oligarch and his lobbyist and lawyer. Who was his lobbyist and lawyer? Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, aka Pansi Postalita. When you or I want to buy a property, rent an office space, look for a home, we would go online to Redfin, or we would go online to Zillow. We would call a real estate agent. Oligarchs call mayors, and those mayors, Francis Suarez, literally worked directly for him as his realtor, as his in-house counsel. Turns out, we learn later, Francis Suarez's law firm represents MLS. We didn't know about that conflict at the time, but all of these conflicts exist when you have a mayor who has over 15 side hustles that he is allowed by law to have outside employment, and does not disclose what those jobs are, who his clients are, or where his conflicts are. And let's be assured, every time we learn about who one of his clients is, despite his efforts to cover it up, there is almost invariably a conflict of interest where he is exploiting his public position for private profit, as he absolutely was here when we saw Jorge Mas go to the Miami Herald editorial board to make his case for this scheme. The editorial board sat on one side of the table, and on the opposite side of the table was Jorge Mas and one other person, shoulder to shoulder with him, in a suit with a legal pad. That was Francis Suarez. There is no greater symbol when I say, who is on our side of the table? Who is negotiating on behalf of the taxpayers? The answer is nobody. Absolutely nobody. And and this was every bit of the giveaway that you've heard that it is. This was every bit as dirty as you heard that it was, and ultimately one of the 5 commissioners, because they needed 4. Ken Russell was the swing vote, who's now running for mayor. Good luck. And Manolo Reyes, that district's commissioner, in a really admirable, rare display of ideological rigor and dedication. And in Florida, we might call that standing your ground. He could not be moved. He could not be cajoled. He could not be bribed or extorted. He said he was a no vote from day one, and he remained a no vote, whereas everybody else was for sale. Joe Carollo horse traded his best ideas away, which turned out to be nothing but extortion in disguise, to get what he wanted personally out of the deal. Ken Russell, I don't know what happened there. He's got all kinds of stories about that, but he folded, absolutely just folded like a shitty broken tailgate tent. So I don't know where to go with this, but there's lots to say.
Yeah, and you mentioned Joni Mitchell, right? You quoted Joni Mitchell, pave over paradise and build a parking lot. Jorge Mas and his group couldn't even build the promised parking lot in Fort Lauderdale at Lockhart Stadium. I went back for the first time. I vowed never to go back to that facility, just like I made the same vow with the Orange Bowl once it was knocked down. Still haven't been back to the OB, or Marlins Park as it's now known. But I did go back to Lockhart for the first time last week, and that parking lot was never built. So we'll get to Lockhart in a minute, but Francis Suarez's law firm representing MLS. Billy, tell us a little more about this, because this is a big part of the story we didn't know in July of 2018.
Sure.
When we were fighting, when the fight was being fought at the city commission level, or when the vote took place on the ballot, City of Miami ballot in November of 2018.
But it was obvious that Francis Suarez was working for Jorge Mas and David Beckham. He wasn't exactly shy about it. He was an unregistered lobbyist. There's just look at his public displays of marketing and fealty. He was like, he's like if Glenn Ross opened an office on Alhambra Circle or something. This guy, and so like he is just so greasy and sleazy and oily and scaly, and that's why we call him Pansi Postalita. And so, and everything that was going on that we know behind the scenes, that we knew contemporaneously, that we know now, he was operating solely on behalf, or acting solely on behalf of the best interest of his clients, not his constituents. And that includes, I'll tell you a story that the mayor was calling around to other property owners, to potential sites for a stadium. And they had an opportunity not too far from Mel Reese. This was pre-Mel Reese, to basically get free property, like a $1 a year, some nominal amount of money for a long-term lease. But there was only sufficient property for them to build a stadium. All the other property and neighboring property would have belonged to their landlord. And they quickly realized, well, that's not what we want. We don't want to build a stadium. There's no money in a soccer stadium. The money's in the land grab. And so the mayor basically ghosted this other property owner who was effectively offering free property for the stadium, because this was never about a stadium. Not to mention, why is the mayor fucking calling around anyway? Irregardless, as we say in Miami, because we're illiterate, but I use it ironically. He ghosted because it was not about property for a soccer stadium. It was about, 73 plus acres. And what happened? What secret deal was also struck that we now know about? Guess who is going to be one of the first tenants on the property at Mel Reese? The city of Miami. The city of Miami, in another boondoggle, agreed to sell, again, no bid, below market value, waterfront property where the MRC, that's the Miami Riverside Center, that's where outside of City Hall, all of the city government is. It's a not a high rise, but it's a multi-floored building where all of the city's agencies and departments are located, where everybody doing business with the city effectively goes. Very few people go to actual City Hall unless you need to meet with the commissioner or the mayor. Everywhere else is located, or everything else at the city is located at the MRC. So very valuable waterfront property. They sold it for this deal to a developer who had to agree in part with a cap, I'm sure, to help build another facility for the city. So obviously the city could have offices. So where are they going to go? To Mel Reese. That's where they're going to go. So everywhere you turn, this is a real estate scheme. And of course, a publicly subsidized real estate scheme. And I mean, I will eventually get to it, but this whole public park scam too, which Fort Lauderdale is the model, is the canary in the coal mine for us. And these people never learn. These public officials are deliberately blind and ignore the facts that we have bad actors here with a track record of bad acting. And yet we still give them whatever they want so that they could fuck us in Miami the same way they fucked you up in Fort Lauderdale. And it's crazy to me because, these so-called public-private partnerships, which are just corporate welfare, a contract is only as good as the party's willingness to enforce it. And so even if they agree to something in the contract, as it turns out, it doesn't matter. They're never going to enforce it. They'll change it sometime down the road, or they'll just ignore the contract. And who's going to sue them? The Mayor Francis Suarez, the city manager Art Noriega, who was reportedly promised a job by Jorge Mas and Inter Miami, or as we call it, Inter Fort Lauderdale, because that's where they play. He was promised a 6-figure job after he retires from the city with his 6-figure public pension. Art Noriega, the General Art Manuel Noriega over there, the city manager at Miami. A guy who is a overpriced furniture salesman. He's just there so his wife could sell overpriced furniture from her family's furniture company to the city. Everybody's got a side hustle at this city. And of course the fish rots from the head down. So when your city manager and your mayor are the most corrupt hustlers in the city, that sends a message of impunity to everybody else in the city, all from your department heads in code enforcement and building and police chief, all the way down to your street cops and your code enforcers. Like, and let's not there's thousands of really decent, hardworking people that work for the city of Miami, but life is almost impossible for those people because they're swimming with sharks. It is a Miami mafia that only benefits those who play the game. And if you don't play that game, you're going to get forced out. Your life's going to get destroyed. It's going to end your career. They could come after your house, your private business. This is a third world banana republic tin pot dictatorship and an oligarchy, obviously.
Yeah, obviously an oligarchy. So
otherwise, it's great, though. It's beautiful. Come on down. Come on down and visit us.
I'm going to run through what has happened in Fort Lauderdale, and then we're going to turn our attention to Miami-Dade County and Mayor Daniela Levine Cava.
Jesus.
So in Fort Lauderdale, Jorge Mas promised the city a parking garage. He promised the city public park space. He promised the city public use soccer fields. None of that, and none of that has happened 6 years later. 2019, this deal happens. There was a competing bid, which was, in my opinion, a superior bid, which had actually gone through the process of securing potential tenants, getting public use space, but it wasn't coming from Jorge Mas. So that was, and it didn't have David Beckham and the bend over for Beckham effect that happened in Fort Lauderdale 9 months later, just like it had happened in Miami. And so what you have now is an MLS club that owns two giant pieces of property, probably the biggest pieces of green space in the two major cities in South Florida, in the city of Miami and the city of Fort Lauderdale. And he is going to profit off of both pieces. And there's a side hustle going on in Miami, as you mentioned. So then we get the World Cup bid, aided by President Trump and others doing business with FIFA. And so the 2026 FIFA World Cup is coming to the United States. Miami is named as a host city. And you talked at the outset, Billy, about all of the cuts in public services, all of the sorts of things that get lobbed off in order to fund this grift: sports stadiums, entertainment facilities, real estate hustles. Perhaps the greatest hustle might be going on with this World Cup, where before we get you to talk about Levine Cava specifically, I want to mention that we were told the transportation budget was going to allow for an extension of Metro Rail, which I have plans from Miami-Dade County that they published 25 years ago about an extension of Metro Rail up to Joe Robbie Stadium and out to FIU. None of which has happened. I have the published plans. I think I'll put it in the show notes. I have the actual images. That is not being done. Nothing has been done in terms of improving public transportation and public access to the stadium when the World Cup is being hosted there. Instead, we have this grift going on. So walk us through that. Walk us through even Levine Cava's trip to Qatar and her involvement with Qatar in 2022.
It's important to remember that sports welfare is a bipartisan boondoggle, or should I say nonpartisan. And to be fair, on the Republican side, you'll have some so-called fiscal conservatives who pretend to put up a fight about it. On the Democratic side, they just make it rain. I mean, Miami-Dade Mayor Daniela Levine Cava is a sports welfare queen. And every time the Miami Dolphins come to her, or it's mostly the Miami Dolphins, or anybody comes to her for sports welfare, she is too eager to dole it out. It's suspicious. But even when they pretend to be like, oh, it's too much, or maybe we should reprioritize our limited resources, allocate them a little bit smarter to help more people rather than just billionaire sports team owners. Even then, they ultimately always land on the side of their sponsors and benefactors and major donors. And in the case of sports, as I said earlier about the intangibles of it, one of my favorite moments during public comment at the city of Miami about this Mel Reese boondoggle is there was all these people lining up speaking very articulately, very intelligently, crunching the numbers as to why this was a terrible deal for the taxpayers, and the city either shouldn't accept it or should negotiate better terms, one after the other. You had even real estate developers chiming in, major duty ones like George Perez. We had one real estate developer who came and offered more money than what Jorge Mas and David Beckham were offering. Right there, he says, I'll just pay you more than they're offering. I'm going to outbid them right here. And of course, they were looking for a no-bid deal for exactly that reason, because it was below market value, and someone would easily come in on those terms and outbid them. And on the other side, there were the people who had gotten their T-shirts, from Inter Miami to show solidarity, their free T-shirts, and they showed up. And I'll never forget, one guy comes up, and I'm going to sound like I'm making fun, but he was very sincere. This was not bullshit for him. He stood up there, and with almost tears in his eyes, he put his hand over his heart and he said, "Soccer is love." And that was his argument for why they should vote for this shitty real estate deal. And I'm like, you can't really argue with that. That goes back to the whole fan thing. You can't negotiate or argue with fanatics. It's just soccer is love. There's a reason we need to do this. And so that's not the case with Danielle Levine Cava. Soccer is money. Sports welfare is money, and not money for the community, but money in her pocket and in the commission's pocket. And last year, FIFA came with their hand out, those criminals, and demanded a $40+ million
and those criminals, I should mention, Billy, really quickly, have basically moved their world headquarters to Coral Gables. I don't think there's a coincidence in that. So go on.
You need to identify a hustle. They have an office in Coral Gables, I'll tell you that right now. But these guys came with their hand out for over $40 million in cash and incentives from the broke-ass taxpayers of Miami-Dade. And to be fair, Daniel Perez, the Republican speaker of the Florida House, said, "This is ridiculous. What are we doing?" And so they did something very sneaky and very crafty. They gave them basically a payment plan. They cash flowed it. They said, okay, we're going to cut this deal in half and only give you $20+ million. And then what did they do the next year? Just this, past month? They gave them the other half. So instead of one giant $40+ million welfare package, they gave them two $20+ million welfare packages sneakily, and no one really had any argument. They just kind of quietly brought it in, no debate, no discussion, rubber stamp, let's move on. And Daniela Levine Cava admitted that this scheme may require the county to cut services. So constituents will be not only paying their taxpayer dollars, but they will be misappropriated away from county services that we expect to receive from our county. And so this is a crime. All these sports welfare deals are robberies in broad daylight. And in a way, we're all complicit in them. And this was uniquely terrible, because ordinarily they lie to us. They point to some bullshit bought and paid for economic study that shows all kinds of benefits to the community as a result of having these events in your city. And that's why we should give them tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer money. That's all nonsense. The truth is, though, what they actually told us. This time they were, oddly enough, transparent and honest. They said, no, you're going to get fucked. We are going to cut county services if we have to make sure that we can give over $40 million in cash and services. I think it's actually with the in-kind services and donations, it's over $50 million, I think, all in, including the cash. So they're saying we're not going to spend that money on things that the county needs, that our constituents want. We are going to give it away to this multi-billion-dollar racket.
And in the past, my experience with Relevant Sports, which is owned by Stephen Ross, not that he's an upstanding citizen, but just using this as a point of contrast, for the soccer events that were hosted at Joe Robbie or whatever the Stephen Hard Rock is what it's called now. Still call it Joe Robbie. Sorry, it'll always be Joe Robbie for me.
Always.
Yeah, always, of course. Now, those of us who are South Floridians will always call it that. There was an effort by the Dolphins or by the soccer entity that Stephen Ross owns, Relevant Sports, to pay the county for those in-kind services, from parking attendants to security that was provided by Miami-Dade County. It appears with this World Cup, there is no such effort. It is actually being financed on the backs of Miami-Dade County taxpayers to pay for all of this, which is absurd, which is crazy. And yet you have a situation where very, very few people outside of yourself and a few other prominent voices are calling this out.
And remember, Stephen Ross is the benefit of much of this largesse. You have to.
Well, that's true too, of course.
He hosts his venue, his privately owned stadium, Joe Robbie Stadium, hosts these events, and he gets tens of millions of dollars a year in subsidies for F1 and for bowl games and for Super Bowls and for really whatever the hell he wants and feels like it. Because he just, Danielle Levine Cava is just bought and paid for. And so, as are most of the commissioners, they do not want to disappoint their oligarchs. And with this, it's doubly offensive and always has been because the stadium is located in Carroll City, what was known as Carroll City, what is now the city of Miami Gardens. And Miami Gardens is, I think, in one of the few in the country, and certainly maybe the only in Miami-Dade County and few in Florida, that it's a black city. That most of the residents are black.
Yeah, it's the largest majority African-American city in the state, actually.
Yeah, and most, if not all, of the lawmakers and the government administration are black, and this has traditionally been an underserved area and community. And unfortunately, what we've seen is their own politicians, their own mayors, their own corrupt county commissioners, like former Miami Gardens Mayor Oliver Gilbert, sell out his constituents and his people to line his own pockets and for his own power and political ambitions. Again, this is nothing particularly shocking or new. I get it, but it's still appalling. And the idea that the people of Miami Gardens are told time and again, we do not have money for you. We cannot provide you services. We cannot do for you what a county with this kind of budget should be able to do. I mean, you're talking about what, $11-12 billion annual budget we have, over 40,000 county employees. And all we ever hear is, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. And then all of a sudden, there's tens of millions of dollars to give away on a moment's notice at the drop of a hat, not in the budget, but all of a sudden they can just do this. But they can't do for homeless, and they can't do for affordable and workforce housing, and they can't do for public transit, and they can't do for infrastructure that is deteriorating, and they can't do for people who now can't keep up with their HOA payments because of some of the crazy new laws in light of the tragedy in Surfside at Champlain Towers. They can't do. We can't have. We got to cut. Got to make cut. And yet, here you go. Here you go, billionaires. I'm sorry, how much did you need? We'll write the check right now for you. It's not that it's crazy. It's a crime, in my opinion. Like I said, it is a broad daylight robbery.
And we'll close on this note. You mentioned Oliver Gilbert. That's another one, right? We could spend a whole hour about him. There is no tangible benefit. I have not seen any tangible benefit to local businesses in Fort Lauderdale from that stadium deal. I've not seen any tangible benefit to local businesses in Miami from the knocking down of the Orange Bowl and the building of Marlins Park. There have been no tangible benefits to local residents or businesses in Miami Gardens, previously Carroll City, the Norland neighborhood, which is nearby as well, for what's happened in terms of the the taxpayer money that's been thrown into Joe Robbie Stadium, starting with Wayne Huizenga getting a tax break, taking a double exemption. That's maybe when this whole racket started. He took a double exemption for both the Marlins and the Dolphins. So we got two tax breaks. Took the same exemption twice, basically, right?
Well, he had two teams in that venue, dude.
Right, exactly. That was the excuse. So that may be actually the point where this hustle started was with Huizenga and the tax break he was given by the state, and then that's when everybody realized, oh, this is good business.
But let me put it to you this way: there are certain investments we can make. I'm not, despite how I may sound, I'm not unreasonable. And I understand that I know I can't stop these deals from happening. What I hope to do, though, is make them a little bit better for us, for the people that are paying for it. Because the politicians are playing with OPM, with other people's money. They're playing with the house's money. They don't give a shit. They get it kicked back to them one way or another through donations to their PACs, to their campaigns, sometimes even shadier. So they don't care. But it is very much our money. It is our property. And so, so I just want it to be the deals, if they're going to keep getting done, to be done smarter and better and sweeten the pot at least a bit for the people who are really paying here. And that's us. And that said, I can understand. Let's very quickly, the Miami Arena. You remember the Miami Arena in downtown Miami, in almost right on the edge of Overtown there. The Miami Arena cost about $50 million, which was a lot back in the 80s, but it was for an arena like that is a pittance now. And $50 million, it was obsolete the day before they broke ground on it. The design was terrible. The luxury skyboxes were way too high. It was just like, it was not only not ideal, it was an irrelevant and terrible design. But for $50 million, we got first, a brand new NBA franchise in the Miami Heat, and two, a brand new NHL franchise in the Panthers. And so I would say, though, if you want to just do ROI on a sports welfare deal or a publicly financed sports venue, that was a pretty good return on investment. So there are good and smarter ways of doing this. But that's not the case with MLS and Inter Miami. We already have that team. That team already exists. And that team, we left out, they bought a property. They own private property in Overtown to build a stadium. But they didn't even want to build it on their own private property because there was no room for anything but a stadium. They even got a sweetheart deal from the county for a neighboring lot to put parking, and they're not doing anything with it because they got to steal public property, 73 acres worth. So again, there are smart ways of doing this. There are good deals to be made, and then there are bad deals to be made. And now they're promising us a public park. In Miami, they promised you a public park up in Fort Lauderdale that they have never built. And the Miami Commission, okay, these buffoons, just last month, not only, oh God, it's so stupid. They raised taxes by $10 million. There was $10 million that the oligarchs, Moss and Beckham, were supposed to invest in this public park on their property, on what is now their property for 99 years. They were supposed to invest this money there, their own money. And the city just basically took the obligation back, said, no, don't worry about it. You can use your money for something else on your property. You don't have to invest in our park. We'll put $10 million in public money in instead. And it's just so disturbing to me. And then there's the boondoggle with the remediation that's going to cost over $50 million that they claim they're going to pay for. But spoiler alert, they're not.
The city is going to end up paying for that. There is no doubt in my mind.
I would bet the rent on it.
And in terms of the Miami Arena, one other defense I'll make of it is that you could take the Metro Rail right to the Miami Arena. So even coming from Broward, sometimes I would take Tri-Rail and connect to Metro Rail. Or if I was visiting a friend on the campus, take Metro Rail right to a Heat game or a Hurricanes basketball game. They played there, and the Panthers.
Absolutely. I think it was probably the first time as a child I noticed people taking the Metro. Like I was like, oh, that's a thing. I lived in Northeast Miami-Dade. I later went to high school at New World School of the Arts, so I became very familiar with the Metro Rail and the Metro Mover. But like that, going to the arena was the first time I'm like, oh, this is like a thing that people do in an urban center. Like it made me realize the importance and potential of public transit. At the time, of course, Ronald Reagan had famously said that considering the amount of money that it cost to build Metro Rail to nowhere, basically, at that point, and the ridership at that time, he said it would have been cheaper to buy all of the riders' limousines, chauffeured limousines instead.
And at the time, it was true. But then there have been usefulnesses of the system, but the system hasn't been built out. So let's end on this. I mentioned earlier, Miami-Dade County had plans, and I'm opening up the plans now. I mean, we're on audio, so your viewers can't see it, but they were going to build the orange line of Metro Rail all the way up to 215th Street. There would be a station at 199th Street. That was for Joe Robbie Stadium. It was also going to go all the way out to FIU. And they were going to increase the train service on the from Government Center south to Dadeland, to the Dadeland South Station. None of that has happened, okay? And these plans were from 25 years. Well, let me see. Who was the commissioners at the time? Joe Martinez was, Carlos Alvarez was the mayor. So it's circa 2005. Yeah, so let's say this is from 20 years ago, Billy. None of this has been done.
Dude,
nothing.
We voted to tax ourselves to do it.
Yes. This is after that. This was a response to that. This is what we planned because you guys voted to tax yourselves. They didn't do any of it.
Our own government literally stole billions of dollars from us after promising us that if we voted to raise our own taxes by half a penny, that they would invest in this expansion of public transit. And they misappropriated that money into like other elements of, like paying bus driver salaries, which it was not intended for, or just into the general fund, which it of course was not intended for. They effectively stole the money. It was a total bait and switch. They promised us, if you vote to raise your taxes, this is what we'll do with it, and never spent one penny, let alone half penny, on any of those. And now all the Metro Rail has become is another bullshit real estate hustle in what they have now called the transit corridor, by saying that we will give developers variances. We'll let them build their buildings much higher with many more floors and units than is allowable by law. We'll allow them to build far fewer, if any, parking spaces than are required by law, because they are in the, quote, transit corridor, which just means they're like, I don't know, you can see the Metro Rail from your window or from your building or something. And the idea being that, oh, they can house more people. Oh, they don't need parking spaces or 2 parking spaces for everyone or guest spaces for everyone because people will use the transit corridor. This is a fraud. I mean, that's just a lie. But it's an excuse now for developers to get more breaks, more incentives, make more money while they are making zero investment in any of the infrastructure necessary to develop at that unsustainable rate. So you'll have more people and more cars and more traffic and more pollution and more of a drain and a strain on our county services and our resources and our water and our sewer. And you're going to cut all that from our budget because we need to give away hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for a baseball park and a soccer stadium and FIFA. I mean, it is absolutely unsustainable, all of this, because what's going to happen someday is people in Miami at some high rise in Brickell that they overpaid millions of dollars for, they are going to flush their toilet and nothing is going to happen. Because that water is not going to have, and that shit is not going to have any place to go because Miami is already so full of shit. The pipes aren't getting any bigger underground. The streets aren't getting any wider. So this is what we have, and we are just filling it with shit, and until it is full and overflowing, and we will see swamp favelas in our lifetime here in this third world cesspool we call home.
So before we let you go, I think everybody listening knows about the U and the U2. I think that everybody has watched that. So plug your other documentary films, what you're working on now, Because Miami, and everything else.
Sure, I have a podcast every week called Because Miami on Dan LeBetard's Meadowlark network, available everywhere your podcasts are on the LeBetard and Friends channels and RSS feeds and YouTube, etc. And I'm at Billy Corben, Corben, not Corgan, the lead singer of the Smashing Pumpkins. I'm on all the social media there, although I've been less and less on Twitter these days. But at Billy Corben, and what else? Go to CocaineCowboys.com, and you'll see all of our work over the last 25 years in nonfiction and true crime filmmaking. And yeah, check us out at CocaineCowboys.com and watch our stuff.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Billy, for your time. And we will probably have to do a follow-up on this. I'm almost positive.
Oh God, I hope not. I hope all of this gets canceled. There's no more sports welfare, and we never have to talk about this again.
So thank you for joining us on this special podcast. You can subscribe to Beyond the 90. You can sign up for a free subscription via Substack, or a paid subscription, or become a founding member, which gives you basically lifetime benefits. We comp you after you do that at beyondthe90.net or beyondthe90.substack.com. And then in terms of the Florida History Podcast, you can subscribe to the Florida History Podcast on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, all the usual podcast places. Florida Squeeze is at thefloridasqueeze.com. Also, this podcast, the Beyond the 90 podcast, you can subscribe to on Apple and Spotify or via Substack. Now, we're working on getting this podcast and the Florida Soccer Report and are talking USL2 to you. We're working on getting those three podcasts on other podcast catchers. Right now, they're just available on Apple, Spotify, and via our website at Substack. But looking to get it on other podcast streams. Although, truthfully, between Spotify and Apple, we probably have 95% of the market there. But we want to make it available and accessible to those of you who may use other podcast platforms. I, for example, tend to use Overcast, so we're not listed on Overcast yet, so that's a minor annoyance to me. I'm listening to our podcasts on Apple, our Beyond the 90 family of podcasts. So anyway, I'm Carter Krishnaiyer. Again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Billy Corben for joining us. And we'll be back real soon. We'll have a third half podcast at the end of the week with Jonathan Starling. Whatever happens in between, we'll have something on Beyond the 90. And obviously the Florida Soccer Report with James Knowles and myself. Talking a lot about the Rowdies this week and the sacking of Robbie Nielsen, among other things.